All right, thank you everyone so much for joining us today for our webinar, Transform Your Life and Health with the Mix of Six. On the next slide, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that all callers will be muted. If you have questions, there's a chat box at the bottom. So if you hover over your screen, you should see a little bubble that says chat, and you can use that to ask questions throughout the webinar. There's also a little Q&A box that you should see at the bottom of your screen as well. So you can answer or ask questions there during the presentation, and we'll monitor those as we go along. We'll also be sending out an email with the webinar recording and any relevant links once the webinar is over. So if you have to drop off early, or if you want to watch the webinar again, we will be sending it to you in an email. And on the next slide, I just want to let you guys know we are on social media, so feel free to give us a follow. We're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Medium, and we post a lot of helpful content there, tips and tricks, how-tos, things like that. So we post pretty frequently, so if you are on social media, feel free to give us a follow. And on the next slide, I just want to tell you a little bit about the Anti-Cancer Lifestyle Program. So we have a lot of people attending today's webinar. You may or may not have heard of us, but the Anti-Cancer Lifestyle Program is a comprehensive online lifestyle transformation course for cancer survivors and those who seek to reduce their risk of cancer and other chronic illness. If you're interested, on the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about where to find information. So if you go to our URL, www.anticancerlifestyle.org, you can find out more information about our program. I do want to let you know it is available on a pay-what-you-can basis. It's really important to us as an organization to provide this information and make it accessible. So you can pay whatever you can afford. And it is split up into 5 different modules. So diet, fitness, change, mindset, and environment. And on the next slide, we do have learning circles. So this is if you take the course and you have questions that you want to ask any of our experts, you can join us. We have these every month. Our next one is coming up on October 6th with our environment expert, and it's a chance to just kind of have a casual Q&A with any of our experts as you're going through the course. And then on the next slide, you can see that we have our health coaches. So if you want to ever do one-on-one consultation with any of our health coaches, you can go to our website, and I'll send this also in the email, the follow-up email, and you can schedule a one-on-one with any of our experts. And okay, so this is, I'm going to make introductions, but I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. This is one of our biggest webinars to date, and we're super excited to have you all here. But I do want to make sure that everyone can actually hear what I'm saying. So if you can just type in the chat box where you're calling in from, and I will read a few of them out just to make sure that my sound is working. So I see Rita from Germany. We have Nicole from Orlando, Rebecca. Okay, they're coming pretty fast. Audrey from Austin. Okay, awesome. So it sounds like everyone can hear me okay. So I'm going to go ahead and introductions. So my name is Seema Tucker, and I'm the marketing director here at Anti-Cancer Lifestyle Program. I have with me on the back end, you can't see her, but she's helping me to monitor the chat, Rebecca Epstein, and she's also with us. And then we have our main presenters today. So we have Lorenzo Cohen, who is the Richard Haynes Distinguished Professor in Clinical Cancer Prevention and Director of the Integrative Medicine Program at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. He is the former Vice Chair of the Academic Consortium for Integrative Medicine and Health and is a founding member and past president of the Society for Integrative Oncology. Dr. Cohen has published more than 175 scientific articles in top medical journals and has edited 2 books on integrative medicine for cancer care. And we also have Alison Jefferies, who has a master's in educational psychology and has worked extensively as an educator. She is a former president of the MD Anderson Cancer Center Faculty and Family Organization and works closely with Lorenzo to foster health and wellness in individuals and their communities. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Lorenzo and Alison.
Hello and welcome. Thank you so much, Seema and Rebecca, and also a shout out to Nancy Kane and Meg Hirschberg from Anticancer Lifestyle Program. You guys do such amazing work, such a brilliant resource for so many people. So welcome everybody today. We're so excited to see you and to share this hour with you. So we speak on cancer and lifestyle, and whether this is your first step, your 10th, 100th, 1000th step, it all really matters. And we are going to provide science and strategy for you today. Lorenzo's the scientist and I'm the educator, and together we hope that we are going to provide you information that if you have a cancer diagnosis, if you are somebody who's looking to avoid recurrence, or if you're looking to avoid a cancer diagnosis to begin with, that we have valuable information for you. We want you to be able to build a body that's as inhospitable to cancer as possible. And so we're just going to start with a little bit about us and how we got to this point. Lorenzo and I are married and we have 3 wonderful children, and how we came about to be speaking to you today is that Lorenzo started work at MD Anderson Cancer Center, and I was teaching in the classroom, and he would come home and share all of this really interesting information about lifestyle and cancer. And we started our family, and we realized that we have these kids and there are so many tools and important things that they need to learn about their health that we can give them. So we started pouring a lot of attention into our kids. Then we realized we weren't living that life. And so we started changing our lives as well, and with our group of friends and speaking out in the community. And what we realized was that people really did not have a grasp of what the science was saying about lifestyle and cancer. And that was why we decided to write the book. There are many books out there that talk about diet and exercise, maybe diet, exercise, something else. And we really offer a comprehensive approach to lifestyle and cancer, and didn't see anything else out there that was this comprehensive and with a really up-to-date science. So it's evidence-based. And we submitted our draft, and on that day, Lorenzo discovered that he was diagnosed with advanced cancer. And so our lives changed, and we also took on the role of a cancer patient and cancer caregiver. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So we just hope that today there are some things that fill your toolbox, and our suggestions are not written in stone. It's really about what works for you, and you are the best expert on yourself. And as you are learning about a potential cancer diagnosis, you know that there's a steep learning curve. So we hope that you can get some valuable information from today's talk.
I join Alison in thanking you for joining today, and know that we just have an hour together. So this will be just the first step, and we'll share some science, some of the prescription, but of course there's so much more that you can access through our book, through the Anticancer Lifestyle Foundation program and other resources. So we're glad you're here to take the first step. And it is so important to take this first step, because I don't even want to say out loud the staggering numbers that you see on this slide. We at MD Anderson, and me as a scientist, I'm familiar with looking at statistics of cases and deaths on a daily basis. For most of our society, this is somewhat new, but now everyone is familiar with looking at numbers of cases and deaths as it relates to COVID-19. This is the reality of cancer, and this has been the reality of cancer for decades. And the number of cases, in fact, is getting worse, and that's independent of a growing population and an aging population. We have more cases than ever. There is somewhat good news in terms of the percentage of people who survive a cancer diagnosis, but we can avoid all of the suffering and this increased numbers of deaths through simple prevention strategies. This is data from the American Association for Cancer Research, and I'll just go through this very quickly. With first and foremost, smoking. Smoking is the #1 thing we should avoid to prevent over 30% of cancers. Then we have obesity and overweight, and we'll get into the details of that, but that accounts for about 20% of cancers. Virally mediated cancers, estimated 16% of cancers are due to a virus that you can be exposed to, not the coronavirus, but the HPV virus, human papilloma virus. And very importantly, there's a vaccine against this virus that is a sexually transmitted virus. So we can essentially rid the planet of cervical cancer and the majority of head and neck cancers if everyone received the appropriate vaccine. And you don't have to wait for that vaccine like we're all waiting for the COVID-19 vaccine. That vaccine is available today. Sedentary behavior, diet, this is accounting for another 10 or 15% of cancers, which of course those two combined are associated with obesity and overweight. Environmental exposures account for about 5%. We'll get into more details on alcohol, but alcohol is a carcinogen, meaning that it causes cancer, and the newest guidelines reinforce that. Ionizing radiation, and importantly the sun and sun exposure. The scorching sunburns that I had when I was under 20 set me up for my advanced melanoma that I was diagnosed with, as Alison mentioned, 2 years ago. This is something that could have been avoided through safer behaviors when I was at that vulnerable age. Multiple scorching sunburns under the age of 20 increase the risk of melanoma by as much as 80%. And this is totally avoidable. And then there's the environmental pollutants, and we'll talk about that at the end. American Cancer Society just came out with their newest guidelines last month, reinforcing diet, exercise, maintaining a healthy weight. And in particular, they call out alcohol as something that should be avoided, at a minimum reduced.
So we have framed our discussion around what we call the mix of six. And these are 6 areas that we feel offer a comprehensive approach to lifestyle and cancer. And we have, here you can see it's social support, stress management, sleep, exercise, diet, and exposure to environmental toxins. And they're in a specific order, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes, but important to evaluate your health looking at these 6 areas and understand that, you know, we often think about them in silos, but it's more comprehensive than that.
And something important to know, and we're not going to be able to get into all the details of the science here, nor do I want to take you on the voyage of cancer biology, but the evidence is there and clear that these lifestyle factors impact multiple biological processes that need to be put in place for a mutated cell that's happening all the time in our bodies to be able to grow and flourish in our body. And of course, we don't want to do that. We want to create an environment that's inhospitable for that mutated cell to grow out of control, which is really what cancer is, uncontrolled cell growth. So the mix of 6 in each of these factors impact at least one, and some of them, as I'll share with you, all of the cancer hallmarks, activating these processes that makes our body or allows our body to be more hospitable to cancer growth.
And we say that, you know, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And when I talked about the 6 different areas, one of the ways in which it's important to think about it is that they stand alone, but they are also impacted by each other. And we all know what negative synergy is. You sleep poorly, you get up in the morning, you decide to skip exercising, you reach for comfort food, you're less kind to your loved ones and cognitively able, and the list goes on. So we know what it's like to create negative synergy. And what we really want to do is turn that around and create positive synergy. And by having these 6 areas, you know, we all have areas that we need to work on, but we also have areas where we're doing okay or we're really excelling. And so the pressure is off of, you know, just one area. So you look at it as a whole when you approach your health. So social support is the most important area, and the reason that we put it first is because of that. We all know what it's like to decide that you are going to tackle, for instance, diet or exercise. And before lunchtime the next day, you feel sabotaged, you feel guilt and shame, and there's blame and all kinds of emotions that really aren't therapeutic to helping you move forward. You need to put those aside, because this is really about stepping forward positively. Social support is an area that encompasses both having a team as well as giving and receiving support. And what we are advocating is that before you step forward to make that decision or change in diet or exercise, that you harness a team together that's going to support you to make that first step so that you can be successful, and then you can make the next step and be successful. So it's really important that before stepping forward that you build your team, build your plan, and then step forward to the change that you're interested in making.
It's also important to know that social support has actually a direct impact on our, in this case, mortality. And this was looking at the flip side of social support, which of course is loneliness and feeling socially isolated, had a direct impact on all-cause mortality. And what we know from that essentially is that people who are better connected and integrated into their network, and in particular, we have this data on cancer patients as well, do better. Not only is their quality of life better, but their longevity is better. And it's estimated that loneliness is equivalent to smoking around 15 cigarettes a day if you try to make that kind of comparison. We also know that, as Alison mentioned, just giving of yourself and being engaged with others is also salutary. And this was data actually showing that there was a reduced rate of mortality by 22% for people who just simply volunteered their time. And then finally, some recent data you can see here, 2019, from wonderful work out of UCLA, which was an actual gratitude intervention. And I know that the term gratitude has been coming up a lot in the past 6 months, and we are finally looking around the world and our lives and ourselves and noticing what we should be grateful for. And of course, we shouldn't have waited for this world traumatic event to be grateful for things, but often trauma, like a cancer diagnosis, makes you more aware of what's going on. This was an actual clinical trial, an intervention, where one group were asked to write about things they were grateful for on a daily basis for a short period of time. And then they measured mood, inflammatory outcomes, as well as the giving of support to others. And in fact, you can see here that the gratitude group reported more giving behaviors during the follow-up period. And most importantly, the more the giving behavior from the individuals, the lower the inflammatory markers. And inflammation is one of the cancer hallmarks. So we see that just the act of gratitude and giving is having an impact on our biology.
So in thinking about your team, and how to provide for yourself and for your, if you have a caregiver, it's as equally important to think about their team as well. Or if you are a caregiver, to think about your team. So technical support and informational support. You need somebody who's the expert, who gives you guidance on IT, or your doctor would fit under this category. Practical support is somebody who can drive your kids or your grandchildren to lessons, or can drive you to treatment. Listening support is somebody who you feel shares your same values and understands you, and you can have a back and forth and you can express what you're feeling. Participatory support, somebody who you know even barely, who would be interested in taking a class. Now more than ever, you know, we need to do those things online, but there's a lot of interest in that and a lot of excellent programs to engage in. Motivational support. Who is that person who believes in you and is your cheerleader and will support you no matter how low you're feeling? And then that emotional support person, the person you can share your deepest fears and joys with, that really close person. And as you can see, this is a comprehensive team. So one person cannot do it all. And so it's important to think about, you know, who you can find out there in your community to play these roles.
So once you have your support, oh, we're not going to stress yet. We are going to share the state of the weight of our society right now. So I'm going to show you some slides that date back to, as you can see here, to 1985, and mapping what you'll clearly see as the obesity epidemic in the United States, as measured by the percentage of individuals who are obese, so not just overweight, but for the clinical term, a body mass index of over 30. And the darkest yellow you see pictured here would be adults, 10 to 14%. Now we have a darker color, 15 to 19% classified as obese. A darker color joining red, greater than 20% of adults in that state. Further darker red, greater than 25%. We see that we're not going back in colors. Everything is getting redder, now greater than 30%. And this is where things stood back in 2010, with the whole map being classified as greater than 20% obese. The newest maps have actually new color because of the way the data is being collected, but you can see here the category of greater than 35%. Again, we're not going back in any direction. 2014, 15, 16, more red, lots of orange. 2018, this is the most recent data. Oops. This is actually 2019. The slide wasn't updated for the number, with greater than 13% of states having more than 35% of the adults being classified as obese or overweight. If we look at underserved ethnicities and racial groups, here we see from 2017 to 19 Black adults. Here we see for Hispanic, where the situation is much worse. For children, the estimate is that 2/3 of children are classified as obese or overweight. And what this means is that the risk of cancer is going to go up even more, because we know that cancer is linked with at least being overweight or obese is linked with at least 13 different cancers. And the challenge here, when we have all the modification in the body that's going on and it's happening at a younger age, the risk of cancers is going to go up even more. And this is something that we can change. So shifting to stress and stress management, the next category in the mix of 6. Our response to stress is in fact a natural response, and historically and evolutionarily speaking, it was an adaptive response. The problem is that we are responding in a biological way, the same way that we did evolutionarily with our ancestors when we are living as hunter-gatherers. And this stress response that used to be adaptive is no longer adaptive. The release of these stress hormones to mobilize us to fight or flee is no longer healthy. And the problem is that we are experiencing chronic stress, and our ancestors probably didn't experience a lot of chronic stress. They either overcame the situation they were in, or they didn't, and they died. So we probably, I argue, have evolved from ancestors who had an exquisitely sensitive acute stress response. That is no longer good for us. And chronic stress is so damaging, it actually gets into every single cell in our body. And you see pictured here, chromosome strands pictorially represented with pink on the ends are the telomeres. And what happens when cells divide is we have what's called telomere attrition. And when your telomeres get too short, you have what's called chromosomal instability. And when a cell divides and you have chromosomal instability, this is actually a risk factor for cancer. So telomere attrition is a risk factor for cancer. What we know is that as we age, just the normal aging process, we have telomere attrition. And that's why, historically speaking, cancer was primarily a disease of older age. This, of course, is no longer the case. 50 years ago, it was almost unheard of to be diagnosed with breast cancer under the age of 50. Now it is common, and in some of our studies, we have women in their 20s dying of breast cancer when that was never the case. Well, what we know about chronic stress and telomeres is that chronic stress leads to telomere attrition. That essentially is saying that chronic stress is speeding the aging process. And this is something, of course, that we want to reverse or at a minimum slow down. Chronic stress leads to sympathetic nervous system activation and increasing in stress hormones, and gets literally into the tumor microenvironment, making it more hospitable to cancer growth. Chronic stress activates all the cancer hallmarks: decreasing immune function, increasing inflammation, increasing angiogenesis, the ability of a cancer to form its own vascular system. Increasing, actually, it's not even on this slide, but an evolving area of cancer hallmarks, neurogenesis, the ability of the cancer to form its own nervous system. So chronic stress allows cancer to form its own blood supply, its own nervous system, essentially becoming autonomous in the body and growing out of control, something that we really, really, really need to harness. So now more than ever, we see that there, of course, is increased psychological distress in our society. And this is data that represents that, where we can see the subgroups, and we've read about this in the news. Certain age groups are more vulnerable to the stress of what's going on now. But there are many things that we can be doing to control this stress. Now, you know, the easiest thing to recommend to people is to find an easier job, smaller house, or a different family. It's always strange, you know, sharing these jokes over Zoom because we can't hear the laughing. And in fact, we know that you know, those of us with families, this is actually somewhat true, but not something that we can write on a prescription pad. But from a behavioral perspective, there are so many things that we know people can do. Some of them conventional in nature, like cognitive behavioral therapy or individual or group therapy, and then more of these, what we call mind-body practices, things like yoga, tai chi, qigong, emotional expression, gratitude writing, etc. Things that we know from the evidence not only help to lower stress and how you feel and improve your mood, but they actually have an impact on the biological processes that are going on in our body. So what we see from some of the evidence, and this is just one example, and one that I think is important to note, is in this 8-week program, literally just 8 weeks long, not only do the people feel better, and there's been lots of data on mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR, but this actually is evidence to show that it changed neuroanatomy. It actually increased the size of the hippocampus. So similar to when you go to the gym and you're working out and you're improving the function of your heart and your muscles grow when you lift weights, by engaging in this mind-body practice, even just for this short period of time, there was a change in the size of the hippocampus, the memory portion of the brain, and actually a shrinking in the amygdala, which is the fight or flight center of the brain.
So here we have the American potentially version, the Western version of the yoga poses. So what can you do to make, to increase a mind-body practice in your life, to reduce your stress? There are so many different things. And before COVID, it was really about carving out that time. And we were so busy outside of our homes that it was very hard to carve it out. Now that we're indoors a lot more, it's actually become a little bit easier to carve that time out. And there's so many different resources online. I don't have a picture, but we have we have 3 children, and when they were young, we would sit down before school each day and meditate for 2 minutes to 11 minutes, just to start the day fresh and clear. And it was a way of us building, filling the toolbox for our children. So, whoever you're living with or seeing, whether that's indoors or outdoors, this is something that you can do by building your team with your grandchildren, with your partner, allocating time to developing a practice. In our book, we chronicle some amazing patient stories, and Molly is one of those stories, a friend that we see every summer, and just an amazing story. She was diagnosed over 20 years ago with a glioblastoma multiforme, and has really survived and thrived, and she has changed her life. She's made significant changes. So after she was when she was going through her conventional treatment, she realized that she needed to do something else, and she signed up for a program at her local hospital that taught her a mind-body practice. And now that is part of her everyday life. So she gets up and she has a series of different things that she does. She does yoga. She has a meditation practice where she thinks about, this picture is up in an area called Georgian Bay in Canada. And this is her healing place. And what she does is she envisions the fish swimming into her body, taking cancer cells away and then swimming out, importantly. She has discussions with people who are important to her that have passed in her life, that she talks and who give her cleansing, cleaning energy. Her faith is very important to her. Through prayer, that also helps. She does yoga. So she retrained herself in many respects. She had her family help her initially by writing notes around the house to change her thoughts from negative to positive, saying, you are not your illness. There is a positive in this moment. And she slowly made change, and is really an excellent example of what you can do to change the way in which you live, as well as incorporate a really successful mind-body practice.
And when I was diagnosed with cancer, Molly sent us each separate emails. And I don't know the details of Alison's email, but mine was to prioritize stress management. Molly engages in all of the mix of 6, as you'll see when you go through our book, as we highlight her in each of the areas. But this is one that she prioritizes. And I know the evidence better than anyone. And it's an area actually that I wasn't prioritizing prior to my diagnosis. And the diagnosis in some sense has given me the permission to engage in it. In fact, it is the hardest one. And when I started doing a daily yoga practice, I realized that the prescription that we've written and that we are having our patients do as part of our clinical trials is hard. And I acknowledge it now more than ever. But it is just so critical. And what I realize is that the more you do, actually the easier it is to do it on a regular basis, because like all things, it ends up becoming a habit. And this habit is one that your body loves and essentially reinforces inside of you.
Also, I was going to add, we realized that we had been doing meditation with our children while they were growing up. But when Lorenzo was diagnosed, we realized that we needed to double down on that aspect, and both took an 8-week course together. So that we would learn together and then be able to bring that back into our house together.
Sleep is the next category. So we don't need to spend as much time on sleep, because the evidence is just clear here that in particular, too little sleep is extremely unhealthy, and less than 6.5 hours leads to increased mortality modifies the cancer hallmarks in an extremely unhealthy way. And in fact, until recently, the true biological purpose of sleep was unclear. We knew that this was kind of the time of the day where restoration takes place. But the newest data actually comes from the discovery of a whole new system in our body that's called the lymphatic system. So people may be familiar with the lymphatic system, the lymph nodes throughout the body. That's actually where my cancer started growing, was in my lymphatic system, which moves the white blood cells around. But there's something called the lymphatic system, which is essentially the central nervous system going up into the brain and allowing the brain to process built up refuse that happens during the day, like amyloid plaques, for example. And what was learned, not only the discovery of this system that we didn't even know existed about half a decade ago, but the lymphatic system is only activated when we sleep. And that's why actually there's some evidence that suggests that sleep loss and sleep deprivation is a risk factor for Alzheimer's and early onset dementia, when you're not having that time at night to be able to clean out the brain. And sleep loss is actually also listed as a probable carcinogen, meaning linked with cancer.
The National Sleep Foundation is an excellent website to visit just to get the basic facts and for more in-depth information. One of the things I like to point out here is that teenagers need to get a tremendous amount of sleep. And sometimes when, if for those of you who are parents or grandparents, our kids are working late at night and are not getting the adequate number of hours of sleep, and it really impacts every aspect of their physical being. So this is an excellent website to visit. We discuss sleep using the senses. Here, this would be great. I dreamed I got 8 hours of sleep. But for adults, 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Using the senses is a good way of being able to assess where you're having some sleep issues. One of the sleep experts we spoke to said that if you are having an issue 3 times a week and it continues for 3 months, that is something that needs to be assessed by a physician. So please seek one out if you think that you're in that boat. Often we are a little careless about the things we do during the day, which sometimes can result in a poor night's sleep. So exercising even as little as 10 minutes impacts your ability to sleep at night. Napping, if you are going to nap, if you have a problem with sleep, you should try and avoid napping. But if you do, it's 20 to 30 minutes maximum, and set an alarm to keep you within those limits. Being outside also helps your body regulate appropriately when you go to sleep. So using your senses, your 5 senses when you're in bed, are you able to see light in your room? That can throw off your sleep cycle. So, having a mask, they make them wonderfully now and they're very comfortable, and that's what Lorenzo uses. So looking at all of the little shiny lights around your bedroom potentially. When we go to a hotel, Lorenzo is busy, putting tape on the little lights so that they don't disturb him during the night. Smell, using a non-toxic soothing spray before you go to bed. Taking big diaphragmatic breaths before you go to sleep to kind of calm your system. Hearing, do you need earplugs? Are you using a pillow? Assessing those things. Taste, have you had alcohol? We know that alcohol causes arousal in the second part of the evening if you've had too much, which disrupts your sleep. Have you had chocolate? Drinking coffee and tea late in the day. Also, the temperature in your room is really critical and sometimes very hard to get right. So making sure that your covers are properly, are the proper weight. We live in Houston and find that it can be, we'll need air conditioning in the morning and heating at night, or vice versa. So really these small little things actually impact greatly your sleep hygiene.
So the next area is exercise. So the data is really clear here that exercise is going to not only decrease the risk of cancer, but influences outcomes after a diagnosis. This is new data, very new. You can see there 2020 published in the top cancer journal. And what you're looking at here is the risk of developing cancer. And there's this association that the more exercise that you engage in, the lower your risk of developing. And this is just, I'm listing 4 cancers, but there's many more. And you can see that it's not the extreme intense amount of exercise. You're not getting more of a return on the investment by being an Olympic athlete. It's really this moderate physical activity that you need to engage in on a daily basis. Here's a list of a number of different cancers from top to bottom that are influenced by exercise, and new data showing in breast cancer patients that physical activity before and in particular after treatment linked with better outcomes 2 years later, 55% reduced risk of recurrence as well as 68% reduced risk for mortality. Same data is true for colorectal cancer, for pancreatic cancer, and for a number of different cancers. Now, unfortunately, it's not just about that bout of physical activity that you get during the day. It's also just about sitting less. And what's important to share with this data, where you're seeing the same kind of hazard ratios, but higher is increased risk of cardiovascular disease, CVD, or cancer. For those who are sedentary the most, controlling for exercise. So that means that independent of how much somebody exercised, the more sedentary they were, the higher their risk of death due to cardiovascular disease and cancer. And this beautiful data was just published a couple of months ago from my colleague Susan Gilchrist, Dr. Gilchrist at MD Anderson. That is the latest data specifically as it relates to cancer. And the first graph on the left is actual total sedentary time. And you see this dose response effect. The more sedentary, going from 1, 2 to 3, the increase your cancer mortality percentage. And then just bouts of sitting throughout the day. The more the bouts of sitting, the higher your risk. The take-home message is right there. Replacing 30 minutes of sedentary time with moderately vigorous physical activity was associated with the 30% lower risk of cancer mortality. Exercise has an impact on all the cancer hallmarks. I know now you're getting bored of all the cancer hallmarks, but it's not just about feeling better. It impacts every biological process in our body. Our bodies were meant to move and to not sit all the time, and we need to just get more active. The guidelines are very clear from all organizations, and you can see here that it's not just about length of life. It's also about quality of life. It's also, very importantly, about reducing symptoms. And people who engage in regular physical activity throughout treatment, regardless of the kind of treatment, stage of disease, age of the person, you have much better quality of life. And the newest data from the American Cancer Society is kind of pushing things a bit, but still 30 minutes 300 minutes a week is essentially around 40 minutes a day. And they've added this little caveat that they hadn't before. Getting 300 minutes or even more will give you the best health benefits.
So how do you do that? You know, before COVID, the gym was a possibility. You know, finding that team member. I was the kind of person who had a friend, and we went to the gym, and I did my workout there. Lorenzo would do it another way, which I'm going to show you. But you have to know how much you are moving to begin with. So keeping a log, using a tracker, your phone actually says how many steps you take. You fall out of familiarity with it if you don't actually see how far you've walked. So finding places to stand instead of sit. We're standing here. We stand sometimes to watch television. We dropped our second child off at college this year, and gave him a computer stand, a very inexpensive computer stand, and I just texted him 2 days ago asking him whether or not he was using it. So, you know, finding ways. You can use an ironing board if you have one of those, and you can lay out your work. So there's many ways to at least stand. And then, of course, there are all the courses online that you can take currently. And then hopefully at one stage or another, we can go back to gyms or exercising in different ways. So breaking up it in the day, you don't have to do it all at once. And actually you don't want to exercise for 45 minutes and then come home and sit for the rest of the day. You want to be active the whole day, and you can break up exercise into small chunks. So developing a routine that's going to work for you in your day is the most effective. And I know that COVID has thrown us all off, and that we've had to reestablish and find new ways of kind of carving out routines. And it's very challenging if we have kids at home. We are great believers in rewarding our kids and rewarding each other with activities versus things or food. And so, you know, organizing things that we can do together as groups, walking, playing at the park, you know, exploring something new in the city that we haven't seen. So we try and make activity in our social events. Lorenzo, before COVID, was working at MD Anderson on site and would take the stairs. So he's on the 12th floor, and every single time that he had an opportunity, he would take the stairs, not the elevator. So this, you know, you can find it in a variety of different ways. He also requested from the administration to have a treadmill desk, and they said no. So then he started doing other things. So he has walking meetings, and actually now with COVID, if you're working, this is a wonderful opportunity. You can be out walking and having a meeting as well. You can get, so here's Lorenzo with his stand-up desk. And he also bought a recumbent bike that he can slide under his desk. It's a very inexpensive one. So there are many different ways that you can put exercise into your day, even if you're working full-time at home.
So the next category is diet. And I'm afraid we as a world have gone a bit off track with diets. We talk about diets, there's so many different diets out there, but I think, you know, hopefully at the end of this, you'll see that it is not that complicated. I'm afraid that how we treat animals, how we raise animals, not only impacts our health, it actually impacts the development of pandemic viruses. The SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that's causing the COVID-19 illness, originated in animals, originated from a market that was treating animals in a horrible way. It's believed that the Spanish flu pandemic that people are more familiar with now than ever before, not really exactly sure why it's called the Spanish flu, because they believe it originated in the United States from a farm that was raising animals in a very unhealthy way. So these are called zootropic diseases, viruses that come from the way we raise animals, come from animals into humans, and of course are causing devastation around the world. The way we raise pigs is no better, and of course chickens is horrendous. And this is all very new. The other thing that's very new is the amount of sugar that we consume as a society, not only as added into our foods, but also in all kinds of creative ways that the food industry has come up with to mask sugar and to hide sugar. And both animal products and excess, not just sugar, but excess glycemic load, we know are linked with cancer risk. On the flip side of this, we see that the more people are mirroring what would be called, and what we call a plant-centered diet, the lower the risk of cancer, the better the outcomes after diagnosis. Here's an example from a large observational study where vegans had a lower risk than non-vegetarians. Vegetarians and vegans had even better outcomes. Similarly, after a cancer diagnosis, this is a snapshot from our book that is showing that not only is the intake of vegetables, the higher the intake, the lower the risk of recurrence of disease, but they were particularly interested in, was there a dietary constituent, in this case cruciferous vegetables, that conferred that benefit? And yes, in fact, high cruciferous was associated with lower risk, but if you add on high variety of other vegetables, the risk is, a high amount is 52% reduced risk compared to moderate or low amount, even if you're consuming the largest variety of cruciferous vegetables. Again, all the cancer hallmarks are impacted by diet and therefore cancer risk. And those who want to delve deeper into this, this was a paper just published earlier this year in Nature Reviews Cancer, showing the direct link between the biological effects of dietary constituents and risk of cancer.
So are we saying that you need to become a vegetarian or vegan? No. What we're really saying is that you want to incorporate those whole food, plant-based, high fiber, low glycemic foods into your diet. And here is a plate that we use and that I found very helpful when I was starting to implement this in our family. When you're planning a meal, make half of it vegetables and plan those, not the starchy vegetables, but low glycemic vegetables. So you can see here we've got broccoli, cauliflower, you've got a tiny bit of a sweet potato over there, but plan that half of the meal first, and then, you know, fill in the rest, and have a very small, lean, clean animal protein if you use it. Nuts and seeds are excellent, beans and legumes, and whole grains. One of the things about this approach is that to get the recommended number of vegetables in a day, you really have to start at breakfast, because if you think about it, so often we have a bagel for breakfast or toast, we have a sandwich for lunch, and then we have pasta and pizza for dinner. All we've done is eat white carbohydrates that actually do not feed our body and give us anything nutritious. And so it's really important to think about that half of each meal should be vegetables, and it's not that you are getting rid of everything that you've ever eaten. It's that you're introducing in small steps new foods that are healthy, and that they slowly push out those foods that are unhealthy and that actually do not feed you. So some of the ones to incorporate on a daily basis: onions, broccoli, cauliflower, you know, we said the low glycemic starchy vegetables like a sweet potato, you know, fruit, stone fruit, and berries are good in small quantities.
And what's interesting when we look at the US food plate and how we talk about fruits and vegetables, we say 5, 7, 9 fruits and vegetables. And that's actually a bit of a mistake, because fruits and vegetables are not interchangeable. Right. The majority should be vegetables. And in fact, the Japanese have a much better way of describing what the food plate should be. They say 5 vegetable, 2 fruit.
Also incorporating, you know, mushrooms, berries, seeds, nuts, proteins, plant-based proteins. So getting all of these good, healthy things. Great snack in the middle of the day is, you know, almonds with a few dried berries thrown in. You know, there's so many different ways that over the course of the day that you can get many of these foods.
So a really important area to talk about, and we could have a whole hour just on the microbiome, is making sure your microbiome is healthy. The microbiome are the bacteria, fungi, etc., that are on and in our body. And the majority of it, of course, is in our gut. And if your microbiome is in dysbiosis, if it doesn't have high variety, and in particular the healthy species, this is a risk factor for cancer. And in fact, data clearly shows that patients who have low microbiome biodiversity have worse outcomes after a diagnosis, as well as increased risk of cancer in the first place. And beautiful research from the laboratory of Jennifer Wargo showed that in a paper that they published in Science a couple of years ago. Low microbiome biodiversity, worse outcomes for, in fact, melanoma cancer patients who were on immunotherapy. We have under review and presented publicly, so I can share with you here, data that we collected from melanoma cancer patients. In fact, I interestingly had to sign a consent form for my own study, of which I'm the PI. So we collect questionnaire data, what people are eating, how they're leading their lives, because actually all of the mix of 6 influence the microbiome, but we don't have time to get into that. We collected stool samples where you can measure the microbiome, and then we looked at how people respond to treatment. And what we found clearly was that, as you can see here, patients who reported eating a high fiber diet had a much higher probability of responding to immunotherapy, as much as a 5-fold difference. And somewhat surprising to us and a lot of people in the community is that those who were taking probiotics that you see here pictured on the right had lower microbiome biodiversity, meaning they had less variety of not only the healthy species, but any species in the body. And we believe that's probably because of taking a probiotic, which in and of itself may not be an unhealthy species, lactobacillus or bifidobacteria, but that's all you're getting in a lot of these probiotic supplements, is you're getting 1, 2, 3 species. Even the best supplements out there have 5, but there's hundreds of healthy bacteria that we need in our body. And those who were taking a probiotic had a much lower probability of responding to immunotherapy. So be very careful if you think you're going to get your nutrients from a pill or a supplement. I write about this in a op-ed that was published in the Wall Street Journal last year, kind of sharing my own exploration of my own poop and what happened across the course of a year. So I encourage you to take a look.
So how do you keep track and make sure that you are actually eating? A food diary is a great way of kind of checking in with yourself about what you are eating and how much of the good stuff you're getting. We talk about 90-10. So 90% of what you eat is health-sustaining foods, and 10% are neutral or health-depleting foods. And so trying to work at each meal to get to that 90% of health improving foods.
And what we actually heard from cancer patients in our clinical trial, trying to get them to shift from a 50-50, a lot of them came in at 50-50, and it's a tall order to say only have 10% health depleting, having them approach that 10% in a mindful manner, change their taste, change their belief that 1 tablespoon of ice cream was going to satisfy them. But when they ate that tablespoon of ice cream in a mindful manner, it satisfied them in a way very differently than before, when they would, be mindlessly eating a whole bowl.
Another thing really important is reading labels, because sugar is in absolutely everything. Pesto, tomato sauce, everything. And so really important to read labels and to look and see what's in the food that you're eating. Also, the quality of the calories you're eating. So 50 calories of chocolate chip cookie is very different than 50 calories of broccoli. And one of the things I didn't mention earlier on, but how you feel on the outside is actually what's happening on a cellular level on the inside. So when you feel badly from a meal that you have just eaten or that you've been sitting at your desk all day long. That is actually having an effect at a cellular level. So I encourage you to keep track just for a couple of days to see where you are, then make some changes, then keep track again so that you're checking in with yourself in the same way you are with how many steps you're taking or the kind of exercise that you're doing. And this is just a picture of our refrigerator because we go to a local food market where local farmers sell their fruits and vegetables, and we fill up at the beginning of the week and we eat our way through it.
So this is where synergy becomes critically important. And, you know, when you talk to a lot of physicians and you ask about diet, they'll say, well, you know, the data's mixed or it's not so good. And in fact, if you look at the large clinical trials that have tried to increase fruit and vegetable consumption in cancer survivors, and then you look at long-term outcomes, the data is actually quite mixed and not as robust as one would think. But that's because they're changing one behavior. And what this graph shows is women who were part of a clinical trial where the goal was to increase fruit and vegetable consumption, and there was some effect, but it was somewhat modest. The first three lines that are all overlapping in each other in terms of survival curves are the people who didn't change anything, the people who changed just diet, or the people who changed just exercise. That line standing out there all on its own, the ones who survived the longest, are the women who changed both diet and physical activity, clearly showing what we would call synergy. Same goes for stress. This was a fascinating study that brought people into the laboratory and fed them either an unhealthy meal or a healthy meal, and then looked at how their body responded to the meal. In this case, it was C-reactive protein, a protein in the body that is, when it's higher, it's associated with increased inflammation. And the amount of stress that somebody had in their life had an influence on how the body responded to that meal. In fact, high levels of stress negated the beneficial effects of the healthy meal. And you can see there that having one or more stressors in their life had them respond to the unhealthy meal in the same way that they responded to the healthy meal. So not only change diet, but you also have to manage your stress. And this was a great study that tracked women over the course of a whole year. And again, I shared with you earlier that stress leads to telomere attrition, but not if you are engaging in regular physical activity, eating a healthy meal, and in this case, getting a good night's sleep. Across the course of the year, independent of how many major life events you see pictured here, their telomeres were not shorter by the end of the year. But the opposite case, of course, was that telomeres were shorter if they had stress and no exercise, bad diet, and short sleep. So when it comes to the environment, and we're coming to the end here, we have to think about these environmental exposures in two categories. One are the carcinogens, the things that we know cause cancer, asbestos, formaldehyde, etc. A lot of the products that our food is exposed to. Alcohol's on that list. Sorry to deliver that news, but as I mentioned earlier, alcohol is a carcinogen, meaning something that causes cancer. Then you have more challenging, the endocrine disruptors. These are chemicals that can be in our beauty care products, in shampoo, soap, etc., as well as things like BPA that are in the what makes plastic soft in water bottles, etc. An endocrine disruptor is what it sounds like. It disrupts our hormonal system of our body and has been linked with a number of different cancers, particularly the hormonally related cancers like breast cancer, ovarian cancer, prostate cancer. And you know, the industry will often say, well, it's such a low level, it's below a certain threshold for BPA or for parabens within that shampoo. But what isn't talked about is the chemical soup that we're exposed to, literally from conception, where you can see that there are chemicals that are in the umbilical cord blood that is feeding babies as before they're even born, exposed to hundreds of different chemicals. And what we don't know is the interaction between all of these chemicals together, let alone for the extended amount of time that we're exposed to them.
So what we advise is following the precautionary principle. We know that there are over 80,000 chemicals that are out there, and around 8 to 9% have been tested. So your best interests are not being looked after. So we recommend not using a product until it's been proven to be safe and non-toxic. And so that means looking at what you put on and in your body, but also your interactions, in the rest of your house, as well as the outside world, and what you can control, because there is a lot that you can control. And especially important because women are being exposed to, I think, close to 170 chemicals, men close to 130, and teenage girls, it's crazy. So it's really important that we try and limit the kinds of products that we are exposed to as best we can. So important to go through your house and clean out the products that you have as you need to buy new. So what we say is, just in conclusion, is really harnessing that team with love and support, learning a mind-body practice, whether that's meditation or something else, striving to sleep well each and every night, putting exercise into your routine and standing as much as you can, looking at food and looking at that 90-10, and introducing as many new vegetables as you can to push out the other stuff, and watching your environmental exposures. And creating, we talked about negative synergy at the beginning. And so it's really creating positive synergy, and it's contagious. If you get up in the morning and you've slept well and you take a walk first thing, you feel great. So you don't want to come home and eat a poor breakfast. You want to come home and continue that momentum. But remember to put that support team in place to help you be successful. And so, like everything, it's a practice. And the more that you do it, the better you get.
And we hope you start Anticancer Living today and think about what your next step is going to be. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lorenzo, and thank you, Alison. I know we're past time, but we are going to stay on for about 10 to 15 more minutes. So if everyone wants to stick around and ask questions, they can. If not, we will be sending out a recording of the webinar afterwards. So if you have to drop off, we'll send out the recording. So we have a lot of questions that have already come in, and I tried to keep them organized, but it's probably not going to be as clear as I'd like. So I'm just going to go ahead and start asking them as they came in. So one of the first questions that we got was, I was just diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. My diet is good, and I have been a cyclist, riding over 100 miles per week and lifting weights 3 times per week. I know that continuing these activities will reduce the likelihood of me developing other maladies, but will my fitness regime actually target and potentially help me fight the cancer and potentially extend my life?
Well, the data is pretty clear. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, exercise is going to have an impact on what we call all non-communicable diseases, and creates an environment that is less hospitable for cancer growth. So not only will it impact your biology and the probability of better outcomes, we also know it's going to make you feel better. And as Alison mentioned, it's going to improve your sleep. It's going to improve your mood. It's going to improve your memory. It's probably one of the only things that we know is helping with our aging process in general, in terms of loss of memory, that unfortunately we all suffer from, is engaging in regular physical activity. Now, depending on what you're experiencing, the dose could potentially be reduced, particularly if that allows you to bring on stress management and love and support and other things into your life. But physical activity is just critical.
Okay, excellent. And a few people have asked me in the Q&A if I'm going to be sending out this afterwards, and yes, I am going to be sending out the recording. So if anyone wants to watch it again, they can drop off now if they need to, and I'll be sending it out afterwards. So the next question is, they said, I'm vegan and I take a probiotic. Is a probiotic actually harming me? I have a neuroendocrine tumor.
You know, I wish I knew a clear answer. You know, our data is observational in nature, which means that in the human model, it wasn't causal. We didn't manipulate the microbiome of the participants in the study. We did manipulate the microbiome of the mice that are going to be part of the larger publication that's currently under review. And that was not so good. The mice who were given either lactobacillus probiotic or bifidobacteria probiotic that could have a lot of strains, but just limited to that one genus, they didn't respond to immunotherapy as well as if they were essentially left alone. So we don't know. And the concern with a lot of supplements, not just probiotics, is being in that category of we don't know. Should I take turmeric as a supplement? Should I take ginger as a supplement? Ginger and turmeric are phenomenal spices that should be, if you like them, and it'd be good if you can try and like them, because they are really potent anti-inflammatory agents that have been part of our culinary cuisine of actually probably the majority of humans on the planet for millennia. It's just not a big part of the Western diet, but it certainly is for essentially every country in the Eastern Hemisphere. Should you take them as a supplement? Ideally, no, because we just don't know what happens when you take them out from their original source. And probiotics even more so. What I talk about in the Wall Street Journal article, which of course is an N of 1, but I had my samples over time, is that I knew about the data of improving the gut microbiome as a way to improve response to immunotherapy, specifically for patients with my disease. And so I started consuming a very rich probiotic drink, as well as increasing the number of probiotic foods I was eating. Well, what does that mean? That's kombucha and yogurt and miso. And I had my stool sample before I modified everything. And then after about 3 months of increasing my exposure to probiotic-rich foods as well as this beverage, and my microbiome biodiversity went down. And, you know, in hindsight, that in some sense makes sense, because instead of just feeding the microbiome by eating foods that are very rich in soluble fiber, which I was doing, I was overpopulating with the limited species. So I know this is a long answer to that question, and I'm sharing it in this way because at the end, I don't know. But we want biodiversity, and taking a pill is going to perhaps overpopulate the gut with a limited number of species, and we don't want that.
Gotcha. Okay. The questions are pouring in, so I'm just going to go back to back here. So in regards to meditation, we had a question: how old would you say children should be when you start a meditation practice with them, and how can you get them to pay attention?
Well, it's a great question, and on my 2 slides that I didn't include today have the first one with them sitting perfectly, and the second one with them all lying around, which is really what they did the most of the time. I think that you can start actually very young. I think that you can start as soon as you can have them sit down on a pillow and close their eyes, and you know that you can introduce it if you get the guided meditations, right, which is what we did online, and then focusing just on the breathing to start with. and closing the eyes. I mean, it was remarkable what I could see the kids experience. So when they were truly in it, I could look at their faces and just see that, you know, complete calm, and it was a really beautiful sight. So I would say starting as young as you think that they can do, and it's also a tool just to say that if they're upset about something, that, okay, let's just stop. We're going to pause for a moment. We're going to continue the discussion, and let's just take 3 big belly breaths to focus, and now we're going to have the conversation. And so that's the first step, and then sitting down. We started with our kids, they were young, I'm thinking 2nd grade easily, if not before that. And it's a practice. It really, you know, sometimes it's a complete catastrophe, and other times it's a raving success. So it's, and as it is for us, you know, it's hard to learn to meditate.
And it's important to start with a focused meditation.
Yeah.
So there's many kinds of meditation, and many people think meditation, oh, I'm supposed to just sit there and not think of anything. Well, don't try and do that. Do not start there, and definitely don't start there with your kids. Breath is not thinking of anything. Your job is to just focus on the breath, and a kid can focus on the breath. And if they're guided, as in a guided meditation, they're focusing on the cool air as it enters the nostrils. You feel your chest expand, your belly goes out. As you exhale, belly goes in, you feel the warm air coming out. They can focus on looking at a candle or looking at a flower. These are all what are called focused meditations. And, you know, kids can't necessarily focus for as long, but they don't need to. They can focus for, like Alison was saying, 3 or 4 breaths, 1 minute. And that's the entryway. And then you do it over and over and practice.
And what we found was that it was very good when our kids participated and said, I wasn't crazy about that meditation. Let's try something else. So then I would look for things and say, okay, well, let's try this one. And we would agree on the time, and then we would start, so that they became participants in choosing what felt right for them.
Okay, perfect. All right, so the next question, I'm going to ask probably about 3 more questions, and then we'll close out here. There are a lot of questions. You guys can email us if you'd like at info@anticancerlifestyle.org. And if you have any feedback for us, if there's questions that didn't get answered, we'll do our best to direct you to the right place. So the next question here is, so much of the focus seems to be on genetic links to cancer. Why is this not listed?
Oh, well, thank you for that question. I forgot to mention it on the slide where we look at risks of cancer. So having a genetic mutation is definitely a risk for cancer. It increases your probability of cancer multifold. But only about 10% of cancers can be linked to what would be called an inherited gene mutation, something that is passed on from parents to children. Only 10%. So that means that 90% of cancers are either due, obviously to some degree, random chance, or what we know that the majority, over 50% for sure, some estimate as high as 70%, are due to lifestyle factors. So cancer is, again, you know, uncontrolled cell growth that's happening in the body that would start with the mutation. And genetic factors control the cancer hallmarks, but it's our behaviors that will influence these genetic-based factors, the behavior of genes, what's called epigenetics. So yes, cancer is a disease where our genes are misbehaving, but all of the mix of 6 influences how our genes behave. And in fact, there's some data, we gave a presentation back in July, specifically to an organization for women who have the BRCA mutation, which increases their risk. They estimate, 80% by age 80 that a woman could be diagnosed with breast cancer. But this data suggests that diet is going to influence that risk. Even having the BRCA mutation, your diet can influence your risk.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. So the next question is, There's one about, let me just find it. Oh yeah, can you talk about consumption of soy foods and their potential to act as endocrine disruptors for breast cancer survivors with ER positive cancers? There seems to be a lot of conflicting opinions about this.
Yeah,
Unfortunately,
the conflicting evidence comes from some animal studies that got an inordinate amount of publicity. And we talk about this in detail in our book, and I believe we even have a footnote about it, that all the epidemiological data now clearly show, both in Chinese populations as well as in American populations, that consumption of soy foods as a whole food decreases risk of a number of different cancers, including breast and prostate cancer. And where there's a misunderstanding is that, yes, soy is a phytoestrogen, meaning it acts like estrogen, but it blocks, so the estrogen receptor in the body has two receptors, one that stimulates cell growth and proliferation, and one that decreases cell growth and proliferation. And endogenous estrogen, naturally occurring estrogen in the body, will bind to the receptor that promotes cell growth. Therefore, ER-positive breast cancers, meaning that estrogen's fueling. Soy actually blocks the other estrogen receptor that decreases cell growth. So in fact, the data would suggest, based on the biology, that soy could actually be a beneficial food for decreasing risk of breast cancer and decreasing risk of recurrence of disease for breast cancer patients. So now the recommendations, and you can find this on American Cancer Society, National Cancer Institute, that consuming soy as a whole food as part of your regular diet is potentially, because there's always the caveat, beneficial and not harmful. So we know it's not harmful. Is it, they also say, should you now start consuming soy because you think it's going to decrease your risk? We can't quite recommend that because the ongoing trials, or the clinical trials are ongoing. So you can't prescribe eating tofu or drinking soy milk, but it is definitely not going to hurt, and it actually may help.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm just going to ask one last question, and I think this is a good closing question. Are there websites or places that you recommend for people to kind of stay up to date on the latest information? So any URLs that you recommend?
Well, for the environmental one, the Environmental Working Group, ewg.org, phenomenal place to go to. You can go with the product that you're interested in buying before you buy it, and you can see the information that's there in terms of, the list of the ingredients that could potentially cause harm, and I believe alternative options. Other websites, the American Cancer Society has regular updates, and as I mentioned, it's just last month, they have new guidelines for cancer prevention and control. American Association for Cancer Research actually had a press conference today at noon on their update on progress of cancer in the past year, and they always have a focus on prevention. American Institute for Cancer Research, AICR, is also a wonderful resource. Again, primarily focusing on diet, exercise, environment. Unfortunately, there isn't really a comprehensive place of what was started by the Anticancer Lifestyle Foundation, of course, is a phenomenal resource, an actual program that you can go through. And, plugging our own book, we only were able to touch on a few things today, but the book is a phenomenal resource, and we're so thankful that the publishers allowed us to put over 1,000 references that actually are still somewhat up to date, because if anything, what we see happening is just a reinforcement of the prescription that is in our book, Anticancer Living. Those are a few resources to mention.
Okay, excellent. All right, so I guess we'll move to the outro. So as Dr. Cohen said, if you're interested in taking our program, we do go into great detail around diet, fitness, change, mindset, and environment. So you can just visit www.anticancerlifestyle.org. Again, the program is available on a pay-what-you-can basis because we do want to make it accessible to everybody. And on the next slide, it's just our URL, which I've already said, and our last slide is our thank you. So thank you to Lorenzo and Alison for being here today. And thank you to our attendees for staying on. I know it's way past what we promised, but hopefully the information was valuable, and we will be sending out the recording afterwards. And then thank you to Rebecca, who you guys can't see, but she is helping on the back end. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us, and thanks for joining.
And one last thing, if anybody has any feedback for us, if you have questions, there's a lot of questions that didn't get answered, I know. So feel free to send us an email at info@anticancerlifestyle.org. I'll put it in the follow-up email as well, and we'll try and get you answers to your questions if we can. And if you have feedback on the webinar, we'd love to hear that as well. So thank you everyone for joining us.
Hopefully some of the questions could be answered in our book, and if not, then you can also reach out to us at our website.
Exactly, yeah, and I'll include the website in the email. So, all right, thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you guys soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.